Hello there and welcome. I'm Ole Brøger, and if you're new here, I really hope I'll earn your subscription today. This is part 2 of building a fantasy airship. We built this last time, and if you haven't watched part 1, you should go check it up out here in the corner. Today, I am going to build a cargo bay. I will make some interior of the inside of the hull, and we need to build the front castle and the back castle. The front castle, I haven't quite decided yet how it will turn out. I have a couple of ideas, but there's a lot of stuff to do, so we better get started. Well, I didn't expect this project to be simple at all, and I had to redo a lot of stuff. Like when I took off these deck panels, I just noticed that there was a gap here on the planks, and I wanted to rip that off and replace it. I will also need my cutting mat, because this silicone mat I'm working on is only for when I'm painting. It doesn't handle knives very good, so my cutting mat had to come out. And then I could trim off the axis of these planks. And I think this looks a lot better. And now what I really intended to start with, the cargo bay. And I laser cut these hatches for the bay. And I started to make a lot of measurements, and I wanted these to be right in the middle. But then I noticed that this deck plate was not straight. It had some awful angles, and it was impossible for me to put the deck hatches in the middle. So I decided that I actually wanted to redo this. I know this was a waste of foam, but I really had to do it. And if I put back in the deck plates, you can clearly see that the middle part is very crooked, and I have to squeeze the front and back to make it straight. I have this 5mm foam core, and it is a lot more rigid than the foam I used for the first deck plate. And this time I will actually focus on doing some measurements. I'm not very good at this, but it is necessary if I want this ship to look good. And now it is straight. I really like this. The hull is a bit wider in the back, and I will have to trim the sides of this deck plate. I made some new strips of foam to make out for the planks on the sides. There's also the rim. I also cut those out, 5x5mm. My good friend Mike Moans over on Twitch is also building a ship at the moment, Porthaven, a new GameFound project from Dungeons and Lasers, an enormous 28-inch ship, and Mike only have 5 days to paint and build it live on stream. And I was really inspired by the hatches for the bay on that ship. I really love that pattern. So I made a new design for the bay hatches and went out to my laser cutter. And I think they turned out great. And with the new deck plate, it was a lot easier to make sure that the hatches were right in the middle. We also need an opening where the crew can get below deck. I will also need some timber work around the hatches. This is because I want them mechanically to be controlled by a couple of levers. The sides on this deck panel also needs to be glued in, and of course we also need to glue in the rim on the top. This was the old deck plate. Let's remove it and install the new one. And this actually starts to look good, but I noticed another thing. I think it is a bit too steep a slope, so the back end of the ship is not level, and I want to fix that. I took the hull and ran it right through my Proxon. It was a bit tough because there was Mod Podge paint and hot glue, but I managed to cut the back end off the ship. And then we just need to build a new. And while I was redoing this back end of the ship, I was thinking about the deck plates. Now I have redone the bay area. I thought maybe I should just redo the front and the back of the ship, where I'm using the more rigid foam core. So I'll rebuild the front deck and the back deck of the ship. And this turned out a lot better. And now everything is more straight, not perfect, but it's more straight, and it's a lot easier to remove and insert the deck plates. let's get back to work on the hatches for the bay. I've cut out some pieces of foam that I can use for trimming out the edge along the bottom of the bay doors. They need something to rest on so they won't fall through. Then I just need to figure out the mechanics on how to open and close them. But we will get back to that later. Here is the back end of the ship, and it's time to build the gallery, or the back castle on this ship. And these wooden dowels, they are 5 by 5 millimeters in thickness. They will extend 4 centimeters all around the backside of the deck to make a walkway all around the gallery. And this is not balsa wood. I thought I actually could cut it with my hobby knife, but I had to bring out my mini table saw. This is some of the last dowels I have. Some were made of balsa wood and others were made out of pine wood. And this is actually birch, so it's a bit harder to cut with a knife, but there's nothing my mini table saw can handle. Now we got the first beam in place. I will just hot glue it in. I'm impatient. I should have used some PVA or white glue, but this is a lot easier and faster too. And this angle tool is exactly 1 inch wide, and it is perfect for me to get the spacing correct between all these beams that will overhang the sides of the back of the gallery. And after a good while with measuring, gluing, cutting and all that stuff, I came to the back end of the ship, and I want the overhang to be a bit wider on the back and put in some more angles to make it more interesting to look at. These beams will carry the walkway all around the ship. And then we will need a couple of doors to the captain's quarters. It will also need a window so the captain can look down on the ground from his quarters. And this round window, which was the leftover from my timber build, is perfect for the job. And to make this work, I will need a couple of more support beams. On this piece of the army painter foam, which is 10 millimeters thick, I made some texture that would look like wood planks. This is to make walls, but 10 millimeters is a bit too thick, so I will split it down the middle and make 2 parts. Now I just need to make some texture on the other side. For every 5 millimeters, I will draw a line with my pencil. This will also make a good mark for the wood planks. And of course, I forgot to press record when I was scratching it with my wire brush, but I will use a wire brush to make some texture that will look like wood. The walls will be 2 inches tall, and splitting this in 2 will make 2 perfect wall sets. And this is actually how I make the walls. And I will need a lot more of these during this build. When the walls are only 5 millimeters thick, it makes them flexible, and it makes it a lot easier to make curved walls. Now I'll just need to cut them to size and glue them in. And still, I'm using hot glue for this. I have made these door frames out of 2 millimeter plywood. I cut them out on my laser cutter, and I will install them on all the door openings of the ship. I marked it up with my pencil, and later on I found out that there was a bit easier way to do it. But I will get back to that later on in this video. But this one here is cut out by hand with an X-Acto knife, and then I will glue it in on both sides. I used PVA glue, and then I gave it a tiny dot of hot glue to make sure that it will stay in place right away. I used a coffee stir stick as a spacer to make sure that there was room enough under the door frame so I can install some floor planks later. I think we also need some windows, and this box contains a lot of cutoffs and windows and all sorts of stuff I have cut out on my laser cutter. And I think maybe I can find something usable for a window. And these windows are actually some of the first I have ever cut out. And I think they will work okay. I just need to trim them a bit down since they are a bit too big. I don't want them to be as big as a door. Now I just have to trim out the section that I need, cut a hole, put in the window, and it is done. Now I can install the wall piece, and for the corners I will use this 5 millimeter dowel, and the dowel will make the corner look pretty and cover my crimes. It will also provide some more stability. I used some PVA glue, and I also gave it a couple of dots of hot glue to make sure that it would stay in place and I could continue working on the rest of the walls. I made a couple of more wall sections, and now we can make the back wall of the gallery. And this actually put my calculation and measurement skills to the test. The back wall has a 45-degree angle and it is slightly curved at the same time. And in my first try, I already started to make a couple of mistakes. I cut a hole for the window and I thought everything was going to be fine until I noticed that the wall was not wide enough. So this was a do-over. When the back wall is tilted 45 degrees, it needs to be wider and it also needs an angle so it will match the side walls. The side walls will also need a cut, so it will match the 45-degree tilt from the back wall. I found a better way to install the door frames. I'll just glue in a door frame on the wall and then I will cut it out on my Proxon using the door frame as a template. Unfortunately, the Proxon was out of frame of the camera, but I guess you will get the idea of how it works. I just needed to glue in the door frame on the other side. Some hot glue in the bottom and one of the edges of the wall and it's ready to be installed. And the same procedure for the other side. We also need a wooden dowel on the 45-degree angle as a spacer between the two wall elements. And finally, I can attach the back wall with the round window. Not everything on this boat is straight, so I had to trim some of the wood. Unfortunately, I cut a hole in the bottom of the wall where it was attached to the frame. And to cover up my crimes, I've installed this piece of foam that will match the rest of the ship. And nobody will ever know there was a hole in the bottom of the wall. The walkway will need some more support in the back end of the ship. I cut out some more dowels in the right angle and installed them. Everything started to take shape, but this took way longer than I anticipated. But I think we are starting to get there. I will still need to do a lot of work, and I think I will start to go back and work on the hatches for the cargo bay and the access ports for the crew. I made a design for the hatches and some elements that I will need for stairs later. And this is what I came up with. 2 hatches made out of 2 different parts. I'll just glue them together in an angle. And then we have a couple of hatches for the crew to enter the cargo bay. I also need a system for the cargo bays to open and close by pulling a lever. And this actually made me make a lot of do-overs. I had to cut out a lot of the foam that I already installed. I've cut out a couple of my 5mm wooden dowels, and then I drilled a tiny hole where I can push the stick from a Q-tip through. Using super glue, I attached the Q-tip stick along the top edge of the hatch, and this will work as the hinge for the cargo bays. Most of these wooden parts won't be glued in until I have painted all the foam parts of the ship. I also used the same technique for the crew hatches. Now this ship will also need a couple of stairs, and this is a prototype I made. It is made out of coffee stir sticks and popsicles, but it took way too long to make. And if I was going to make maybe 4 or 6 of these, it would just take forever. So I decided to use my laser cutter and combine the parts with some coffee stir sticks. I just needed to cut out a lot of coffee stir sticks in 1 inch width and glue them into the laser cut part as steps. And then we have a couple of stairs. I'll only need 4 ladders, 2 to get below deck in the hull of the ship, 1 to get on top of the back castle, and 1 to get on top of the front castle. If I need more in the future, they're pretty fast and easy to make. And I made a lot of laser cut parts, so I have plenty for the future. But moving on, I will need to make a top deck for the back castle. And for this, I will use some 3mm foam core. I roughly outlined the top deck with a pen and cut it to size with my X-Acto knife. And here, the stairs will fit in perfectly. I'll also need some trim along the edge, because this is just laying loose on top of the back castle. So I found some of my 4mm dowels, and then I will cut them to size and glue them in all around the edge of the top deck. This actually starts to look good. But the dowels is not only for the looks. Since they're 4mm thick and the foam core is 3mm, they are left with an overhang of 1mm that will prevent the top deck from sliding around. I finally decided how I wanted the front castle to look, and after I've built the back end of the ship with the walkway, I wanted the same thing on the front. I will have to put in some dowels like I did in the back to support the walkway. What I didn't show when I was building the front castle was that between all the beams I put in a piece of 5x5mm foam to cover up the gap. I also need to build some more walls, and it was the same procedure as I did before, and here you can actually see me using the wire brush making the texture for the wood. The first wall part is now ready to be installed. I made a door opening and a slightly bigger window. I will also install some windows in the walls on each side. The walls are now ready to be glued in. I was always thinking about what kind of armament this ship should have, and I decided that I will install 2 cannons with gun ports in the front castle. I want the gun ports to be able to open, and I wasn't satisfied with the first part, or not even the second part, and this part ended up being a test piece with some laser cut parts with a lever that could open and close the hatch. But I ended up with cutting some new parts on the laser. The parts will be glued together and they will form a frame where there will be a built-in hinge. And this actually gave me the idea of a future door frame, where I can build doors with built-in hinges. I'll just test fit the gun ports. I won't glue them in yet because I want to paint the foam first. To finish up the castle, I will need to cut a piece of 3mm foam core to size and mount some trim. This is the same procedure as I did in the back end of the ship, using my 4mm dowels that will give it an overhang on 1mm. And I think it would be cool if the ladder was inside the castle, because there's only the cannons in this room, so why not make a hatch on the top? And then I cut a hole and made room for a hatch. But I think this hole needs to be a tiny bit bigger. But during editing this video, I think I will do it the same way as I did with the gun ports. Now this will be an airship. This is not an ordinary ship with sails and masts. No, we need some heavy-duty crossbeams that will be anchor points for where the blimp is going to be mounted. And this is my last 2 pieces of 10x10mm wooden dowels. So I better have measured right, because I can't do this over again without going out and buying some new dowels. And one of the dowels had this tiny hole in it, and I will need to fix that before we move on. And I need to put something in this hole, and instead of using some wood filler or anything that would take forever to dry up, I thought about using this UV putty. It actually works like a thin paste. It's easy to work with, and when you are ready, you can just hit it with some UV light and it will cure instantly. And finally, it can be sanded and it will be nice and smooth. And to give the beams the best support, I will install both of them over the 2 bulkheads. But we will need some cutting, slicing, trimming and sanding. And then there's room for the first beam. And while doing all this, I noticed that I also need to put in a couple of door frames. And finally, I can install the last beam. In part 1, I cut a couple of holes in the side of the hull. This is for a mechanical feature that we're going to look at in part 3. This wooden dowel will have to be able to rotate, and I don't want it to rub against the foam directly. So I will install a couple of bearings that I have cut out on my laser cutter. And since the bearings are going to be in a slight angle, I need to cut the hole a bit bigger according to the angle of the frame of the hull. I cut a round and a square bracket because I couldn't decide which one I wanted to use. So I ended up using the square on the inside and the round on the outside. It doesn't have any functionality except that it will prevent the dowel from rubbing against the foam. I used some superglue gel to mount the bearings. As I have said in previous videos, superglue is not good directly on foam. It will actually melt it. And that is why I used the Mod Podge before, because then you can actually use superglue on top of it. I also cut a couple of holes in the top and the bottom deck. And what is that for, you might ask? Well, you will have to wait until part 3 of this airship build to figure out what this is for, or you can write your guess in the comments. The anchor beams is actually pretty strong, and they can carry the full weight of the ship. But now we just need to prime everything. This time I didn't use Mod Podge on the foam. This is because there is so much wood and I don't want the Mod Podge to cover up the tiny little grains in the wood structure. Well, we got this far. Even though I had to go 2 steps forward and 1 step back. I spent a lot of time doing things over, remaking stuff, making prototypes, test things out. And I spent over 50 hours on this part of the video. There was 16 hours of video footage that I have to boil down to these 20-22 minutes. I actually had so much fun building this, and now that I can see where everything is going, I think this is gonna turn out great. There are still a couple of things I will redo, but we will have to look at that in the next video. I will start to make some pre-painting in the next video, and then we will put in some more details. I hope you enjoyed watching this and you will come back for the next episode. And if you already haven't done it, please hit that subscribe button and leave a comment below what this hole is for. This is it for now. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you soon.